This is a video that's been long overdue. For over 18 years, we have seen countless main characters in the Assassin's Creed franchise. Some great, some okay, some straight up terrible. But with how many there are, I think the best thing to do is rank them all from worst to best. That includes their personality, their motivations, the charm, stuff like that. Keep in mind, this is all my personal opinion. I know every main character has their diehard fans, and that's totally fine. But please don't get upset if your favorite ends up low in this video. So when I say who's in last place, just don't comment, "How dare you place my favorite at last place, I'm going to murder your family." And trust me, I've seen some crazy comments in my time. You know what's funny? When ranking these Assassin's Creed protagonists, one thing really stood out. Every single one of them walks that thin line between a hero and a monster. They fight for peace, but through blood. And that kind of got me thinking about another character who's mastered that duality for centuries, Dracula. Recently I've actually been playing this game called Watch Our Realms, and they just launched a Dracula crossover event that fits that exact theme. Classic characters from the Dracula story are now in the world of Tyre, bringing dark, gothic energy to the game. You can control Vlad Dracula himself, take part in event battles, and even earn him completely free just by playing. There are 4 new heroes in this event. Each one is ridiculously good. There's Count Dracula, the Dark Prince. He's elegant, ruthless, and built for massive single target burst damage. His ultimate absolutely melts enemies. Next we have Lady Mina, who's a crowd control queen. Her ultimate boosts your allies' attacks, and she even has a bond skill with Dracula where she can summon him through a mirror to fight alongside her. Another fantastic addition is Dr. Van Helsing, a marksman who switches from firing silver arrows to dual-wielding axes for devastating AoE damage. And then there's Vlad Dracula himself, a free event hero who charges into battle as a tank, blocking enemies and dishing out heavy damage. The Dracula event comes with a ton of free rewards and minigames such as daily logins, summons, and even smaller event modes to farm extra loot. You basically get rewarded just for showing up. If you haven't tried Watch Our Realms yet, it's a next-gen fantasy RPG available on PC and mobile. It's got over 200 heroes across 10 factions, and every battle is built on strategy, timing, and positioning, and not just spam attacks. The world itself is huge, with amazing visuals, detailed CG animations, and deep hero backstories. Plus, it's super user-friendly. There's background auto-fighting, fast upgrades, and tools that make it easy for new players to jump right in. Now, what's even cooler is that you can go full PvE, take on massive bosses, or join guild wars and fight for dominance in PvP. Oh, and there's a cool thing tied to this event, the Dracula Persona Test. It tells you what kind of Dracula you would be if you were in his world. I took it, and let's just say the result made me question some of my, Templar tendencies. If you want to find out yours, click the link at the top of the description, take the test, and then download Watch Our Realms for PC, Android, or iOS. Thank you to Watch Our Realms for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. Okay, now let's start with last place, and I've gone with Nawe. And this one is unfortunate because it's the most recent game, so it shows how far we've regressed when it comes to main characters. I find Nawe to be one of the most forgettable and bland characters in media, not just gaming. There are maybe 1 or 2 redeeming qualities about her character. She lacks any type of depth or nuance that other characters very easily have. Her English voice acting is oh my god awful, and she just bores you to death when she's on the screen. It's really hard to describe such a character when they are that boring. I've seen barely anybody praise Nawe's character, so I don't think I'm in the minority here, and this goes back to how badly Ubisoft have fallen off when it comes to their narrative department. The opening hours of the game sell a strong pitch. We can clearly see Nawe is driven with her goals, and her first big story moments feel impactful, and then Act 2 begins, and the momentum drops. The story spreads out into loose targets and side plots, so her story and personality don't move at all. And that's what a non-linear structure can do. By the time the final part of the story tries to pull it together, I think it's too late. I finished the game feeling like I knew more about her moveset than I knew about Nawe as a character. But yeah, overall, she's at the bottom of this video for sure. Now, moving away from Nawe, we have Aveline. Now, I don't think Aveline is as bad as Nawe. She's not great, but there are more interesting characteristics about Aveline that stick out. I think her ideas and overall motives are quite strong. You have all the ugly stuff with slavery in New Orleans and the Bayou, so she's easy to get behind because of her reasons. You get flashes of that early on, and also in a few late moments, but the game around her never gives her character the weight it needs. Liberation started life on the PlayStation Vita, and you can actually feel it in the pacing of the game. missions are short, scenes cut off very fast, targets show up with barely any setup, you finish a sequence, and then think to yourself, okay, but why did any of that matter? Meeting her mother should be emotional and, impactful moment, but it didn't to me. And this all ties into how she unfortunately was done wrong because of the type of game Assassin's Creed Liberation is, which is a side game that started on a handheld device. Maybe if Aveline had a mainline game, she'd be a lot more interesting, but I'll be honest, I'm just not interested to see another Aveline game. There is no point wasting resources and money for that which will end up flopping. Okay, now this one's going to upset a lot of the more die-hard RPG and Valhalla fans, and I'm sorry, but I'm placing Eivor here in the video. Now, I'm talking about male Eivor only since that's who I played. It's probably the same for female Eivor too. Anyway, when it comes to Eivor, it's a strange one, because I think Valhalla's story is not as bad as I used to think it was. Yes, it's still a bloated and convoluted mess that did not need to be that long, but under the bloat, there is some good storytelling, and Eivor is a big part of that. But as for around, I don't know, almost the entire game, which is by the way like 50 hours of story, Eivor is a character that falls flat for me. There is definitely good stuff in there. I think the voice acting for Eivor is quite solid. He has a real presence in the reflective moments, and he isn't a one-note axe-swinging stereotype of a Viking. But the problem is what the game does with Eivor over such a long period of time. Valhalla stretches Eivor's personality across a pile of regional stories you can do at any order. That makes it hard to feel growth for the character. One arc shows Eivor as a thoughtful leader, the next has him chasing glory again. Some of that is on the choice system. When a character can be noble, brutal, or even neutral depending on your dialogue choices, you lose a clear line. Eivor often sits in that safe middle, so big moments don't change it much. The Sigurd stuff should carry and show Eivor more in the light, and there are plenty of parts of it that work. There is also the Odin side. I like the concept of a voice in his head pushing pride and power. It gives Eivor an inner tug of war, and that whole storyline with Odin and Eivor conflicting each other is pretty good to be fair. But those moments are not prevalent. We have to take into consideration that this is a gargantuan length story, and that lengthy story affects Eivor negatively as a character. Now, moving on, we have Basim. Now, just to clarify, this Basim I'm talking about is the Mirage Basim, not the Valhalla Basim. Now, on the plus side, the idea for Basim in Mirage is very interesting at the start. We witness a street thief that suddenly gets pulled into the Hidden Ones. We see Basim have a clear goal and a mentor who pushes him very hard. You can kind of witness the seeds of the colder man that we meet later in Valhalla. The inner voices parts with Nihal and Loki, all of that hints at something heavier is happening, and it does conclude at the end in an interesting manner. But for most of the game up until near the end, when you finally take out the Final Order member, Basim is very generic. And this is quite common in modern Ubisoft games. They neglect 70% of the story and would only put effort into the prologue and the ending. And as a character, Basim is weirdly hollow. His voice acting sounds like it was recorded in one take, in a broom closet, and the direction just isn't there. The emotion never changes. There's no, spark in his voice or fire. It's not like Connor where the emotionless was the character. That's the big difference. The weirdest part is that almost all the side characters in Mirage sound better than him. Combine that with robotic facial animations and you end up with a character who's nearly impossible to connect with emotionally. And once again, this all goes back to Ubisoft and their cheap methods with motion capture and writing. But overall, I just find Basim to be very forgettable. The twist with Nihal was interesting, sure, but too little too late. What about 80% of the story we had to witness? That's where the appeal of Basim should have been a major focus. Okay, now we have one half of the Fry twins, and for this one I've gone with Jacob Fry. Now I prefer Evie Fry, but that's just personal preference. Some love Jacob, some hate him, and to be fair I do get both sides. Jacob is one of the most fun characters in the series. Not the deepest or the smartest, but definitely one of the most entertaining. I mean, at the start of Syndicate, it's clearly told to us that Jacob has no desire about Pieces of Eden or the Creed. He's got that over-the-top confident attitude where he's always making jokes, always ready to punch somebody in the face without thinking about the consequences. And I think that's why a lot of Assassin's Creed fans dislike him. He takes out the serious tone of the Creed. And for a game like Syndicate, which leans into a more light-hearted tone, I think he fits quite well. Now, whether you like his style or not, you cannot say the game would have been better without him. That being said, Jacob does have issues. A lot of the time he feels like he's playing a completely different game than everybody else. London's in a shit show with Starrick, the Templars are screwing over the working class, and Jacob's just, running around trying to form a gang and beat up whoever's in his way. His character has potential for growth, but the game doesn't really give him that. He causes real damage in the story, but there's no real, consequence because Evie Fry just fixes his mess. There's no moment in the story where he reflects or changes. He just keeps pushing forward like nothing happened. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes from. But I think that dynamic between the siblings works well. He's not a bad character, but compared to some of the other stronger written protagonists in the franchise, he just doesn't hit those same highs. Still, I'd rather take a loud, idiotic goofball like Jacob over some of the more hollow characters I've just talked about in recent years. This one might surprise some people, but I'm actually putting Yasuke next. I've seen a lot of people say the game would have been better with just one main character and Yasuke as a side character, and I agree. But the funny part is, Yasuke was actually the better written character between him and Naoe, so that's unfortunate. Although being a better written character doesn't mean he's 10 out of 10. If Naoe was a 3 out of 10, then Yasuke was a 6 out of 10. I wasn't expecting much from him at first when the game came out. I thought he would be a protagonist that would be sidelined, with not much depth, but by the very end, I found myself way more interested in what Yasuke was doing compared to Naoe. Yasuke's story is straightforward, yes, but it's handled with care, and I do think Ubisoft cannot afford to mess up his character because of how, touchy the topic is. His loyalty to Nobunaga, the pain of losing his mother on that ship, and the way he slowly starts to confront the people responsible. It all builds up really well. I will say, it did take a long time for that story to kick in, so I do wish it kind of happened earlier. But the thing that really stands out with Yasuke is that his story actually feels complete. I mean, think about it, there's a clear setup, there's a solid middle, and then eventually a strong payoff by the end. I think what also helped is the way his story connects to the bigger picture. His ties to the Templars are strong, and that ending with Nuno Caro and the other Templars I thought was done really well. We see the flashbacks, we see the conversations, and all of it makes him quite appealing, a lot more than I was expecting. Now of course he isn't an assassin, which is a major drawback, but he doesn't need to be, because Naoe is the assassin. I also find the facial expressions to be terrible, which puts me off when it comes to connecting with the character. But once again, that's just a Ubisoft problem, and they need to fix it if you want to create memorable stories. Now here's where we get into the realm of controversial opinions, and I've gone with Arno Doria next up. Now Arno is a character that I used to despise, but I've grown to like him quite a bit. Not love him, but a lot more than how I used to. There are those who see him as a French Ezio knockoff and others who think he's a criminally underrated protagonist stuck in a messy game. I lean more towards the second group. I think Arno has the bones of a great character, but Unity did not do enough to let him fully shine. On the positive side, Arno has a solid build-up. He's not driven by some, massive political cause or some assassin brotherhood loyalty. He's just a person caught in the middle of a shitstorm trying to make sense of it all. And in that way, he feels more grounded than most characters. His dry humor early on works, and there are moments, especially in the Dead Kings DLC, where you can really see the potential of what his character could have become. The guilt, the need for redemption, the personal losses like Elise and his father. It's all there. But to me, my main issue with Arno is that his story never lets him grow during the game. He starts out one way, then kind of flattens out emotionally until the very end. His entire personality is built around his obsession with Elise, and while I don't mind a romantic subplot, this one drags his character down more than it lifts it up. He constantly puts her first, even when it hurts the Brotherhood or himself, and it ends up making him feel passive for a big chunk of the story. Arno had the potential to be more than he was, and that's frustrating. I do think he's a better character than most people give him credit for, but there's no denying he deserved a second game to actually evolve. I've just realized my ranking isn't really the typical one. Most of the rankings I see always put the RPG characters at the bottom and then put the OG ones near the top. But I think that's kind of unfair. I mean, take Cassandra for example. I started out with the older games too, but I actually liked her as a character. I think a lot of people let their dislike for the RPG direction get in the way of judging the character herself. If you actually take a step back and look at Cassandra properly, she's a really relatable and respectable protagonist. Yes, she may not be nowhere near the likes of Ezio or Bayek or Edward or so on, and she's not an assassin, which I get, but that's not always necessary. Right from the start, she's got personality, and that's quite rare to find in this franchise nowadays, especially with the recent games, and her voice actress absolutely carries the role. You know, I'd say her voice acting is one of the better ones in the franchise. That said, I do get the criticism. The whole your choices can shape the character thing sometimes backfires, depending on what you pick. She can come off a bit inconsistent or even borderline emotionless in certain scenes. Some people don't like that she doesn't change by the end of the game, but not every story has to follow the same character growth formula. Some characters are interesting just by how they are, not how they change. And yes, maybe the writing of Odyssey could have leaned more into who Cassandra is as a character instead of just trying to leave her as a blank slate, but even with that, I still found her way more fun and engaging than people give her credit for. Again, she might not be an assassin, but as a protagonist, she's great. I think we should stop pretending she's some disaster of a character just because Assassin's Creed Odyssey was a divisive game. Okay, now next up we have the second half of the Fry twins, and that is Evie Fry. Now Evie is somebody I prefer a lot more than Jacob, and you know, I do think that's the common sentiment too. She's a lot smarter, she's more focused and loyal to the creed, and you know what, she's one of the most by the book assassins in the whole franchise. I mean, you ask anyone who prefers stealth and classic assassin ideals in Syndicate, and they will probably say Evie Fry was the game for them. She's somebody that felt worth investing emotionally in, and unlike her brother Jacob, who's, you know, starting Street Wars half the time and gives no fuck about anything, Evie Fry is the complete opposite. But I think that's also kind of her problem. She's almost too perfect of an assassin. Her character rarely makes mistakes or takes any type of risk, and yes, she does play the cleaning up Jacob's messes role for most of the game, but you know, outside of that, she doesn't really do a lot emotionally. She's got that romance angle with Henry Green, which is fine, but I don't think it's fleshed out as it should be, and only in the Jack the Ripper DLC do we even find out that she and Henry moved to India. But then again, if you collect all the pressed flowers in the base game, there is actually a hidden cutscene where Henry Green proposes to Evie, which I thought is a cool little bonus for people who went the extra mile. So yeah, I don't think Evie's a bad character at all. She's just a little underused. She could have easily carried her own game if Ubisoft actually committed to giving her a full story instead of splitting the spotlight with Jacob. Shay was somebody that I used to dislike years ago. You know, I remember playing Assassin's Creed Rogue a long time ago and just thinking, man, this guy's a traitor, I don't like this guy at all. But you see, over time, especially on replay, I started to see why his story hits differently. And to be honest, I think we need more stories like his in the franchise. You know, I think being young back in the day and playing these games, you don't really understand the grasp of what's happening properly. That is until you replay it years later when you're a lot older. You start to see things that you didn't notice as a kid. Assassin's Creed Rogue is the first game to really show us the Templar side through the eyes of a main character, and that angle alone makes Shay interesting. He starts off as a pretty typical assassin, but after Lisbon, everything changes. His entire worldview cracks, and instead of just going along with the creed like everybody else, he questions it. Now that alone gives him more personality than a lot of characters already in the franchise. I like that he doesn't switch sides because he hates the Brotherhood. In fact, he does it because he thinks they're making reckless choices that are getting people killed. And whether you agree or not, at least it makes sense. But let's be real, Assassin's Creed Rogue as a game didn't go as deep as it could have. I don't really enjoy Assassin's Creed Rogue that much, but I do think Shay Cormac had a lot of potential. I mean, his transition into a Templar feels way too fast. One moment he's spiraling, next thing you know he's in a full Templar outfit pledging allegiance to Hatham. And while I like Shay's cold and serious demeanor, I think his voice acting and delivery are so flat in some scenes that it almost takes you out of the moment. It's like the concept of his story is more powerful than the way it was told. But regardless, I think Shay deserves a lot more credit. He's a complex character who does what he believes is right. And you know, we rarely get that kind of darker storytelling in Assassin's Creed. How could I not put Altair this high up? This is the assassin, the most important figure in the entire franchise, and a lot of people need to realize that, by the way. If you have only played the very first Assassin's Creed game, you'd probably think this is too high. Altair comes off cold, he comes off stiff and kind of robotic, especially compared to later characters. But the thing is, Altair's story does not end with Assassin's Creed 1. That game is just the start. If you go beyond that into, you know, Revelations, even Bloodlines, that's where Altair really becomes something special. You start to see the full evolution. He goes from this arrogant assassin who thinks he knows everything to somebody who literally rewrites the entire creed and lays the foundation for the modern Brotherhood. He questions authority, he pushes back against Al-Mualim, and eventually he becomes the mentor that all future assassins look up to, including Ezio. But I think what I love most about Altair is that all of his development feels earned. He grows because of the things he experiences. So, the betrayals, the Templar philosophies, and I think that kind of growth is rare in this franchise. Now, yes, don't get me wrong, Assassin's Creed 1 doesn't really do the best job showing that. I mean, it is the very first game that released back in 2007. His voice acting is kind of and his writing in that game is minimal, but that's the problem, because you have to dig deeper into his character to find out why he's so great. He definitely does not have the personality of an Ezio or an Edward, or the emotional range of Bayek, but he's the most important assassin in the franchise. Without him, none of this works. And now into the top 4, and at the 4th spot I've got Connor Kenway, and I'll just be completely honest right away. Years ago I thought Connor was the most boring, emotionless character, just kind of there. But looking back, that was just me being stupid with how young I was, where I didn't fully understand what was happening. I didn't take the time to actually understand his character or see what the game was trying to do with him. Because once you replay Assassin's Creed 3 and actually dig into the Homestead storyline, that's where Connor's real personality comes through. He's not charming or a sarcastic type of character. He's kind and deeply committed to helping people, even the ones who treated him like shit. It's kind of unfortunate that the strength of Connor is very easy to miss if you only focus on the main missions of Assassin's Creed 3. But when you see him helping people build a community and being there for the people, that's when you realize how good of a character Connor really is. His story is also one of the most tragic and impactful. He loses his mother, he gets betrayed by the patriots he fought for, he has to kill his own father, and then by the end of it all, his people still get pushed off their land. He goes through all of that and still believes in the creed. I mean, I guess his delivery can be a little flat sometimes, and the writing in the main story doesn't always do him justice, but once you understand who Connor really is and what he stands for, I think it hits a lot different. He's just a misunderstood character, and it took me years to see that, and hey, I'm glad I did. And I'm also glad more people are finally giving him the credit he deserves. This one might surprise some people, but in 3rd place I've gone with Edward Kenway. For the longest time, I've always thought Ezio and Edward Kenway are, side by side, as in locked in as the top 2 without question. But over time, I've came to the realization that Edward is just slightly, and I mean slightly, just a tad bit overhyped. Now, he's still an incredible character, don't get me wrong, I mean that's why he's top 3, but I do prefer Bayek now. That said, Edward's still the face of Black Flag and easily one of the most well-liked characters in the entire franchise. As a Welsh pirate turned assassin, he's just a fun character to play as. His personality, his ambition, his sarcasm, it's hard not to enjoy following his story. But, to me, what really makes Edward stand out is the way he changes. So at the start, he's selfish and completely disconnected from the whole assassin vs Templar thing. All he cares about is gold and finding a way out of his own mess. And to be fair, that fits the pirate life, you can't blame him. But as the game goes on, and he starts meeting people who challenges his worldview, you see him slowly starting to shift. He starts taking things a lot more seriously. By the end, apart from being a new assassin, he's also somebody that understands what the creed actually means and fully commits to it. I think it's proper character growth. Now, the reason he's sitting in 3rd place and not any higher is because it kind of does take a while for that change to really kick in. His character evolution is fantastic, but it's a bit of a slow burn. Still, what adds even more weight to his character is his place in the overall Assassin's Creed story. I mean, he's Haytham's father, he's Connor's granddad. That's a pretty big deal in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, incredible character and deserving of a top 3. Ah man, I love Bayek so much. When it comes to these next 2 characters being Bayek and Ezio, they genuinely go into my top maybe 10 or 15 video game protagonists of all time, and it's very easy to see why. The fact that we never got a sequel for Bayek still annoys me. He has so much potential and Ubisoft just let it go to waste. Bayek is one of the most emotionally intriguing characters in the entire franchise. I've seen a few criticisms where people would say he's just a generic revenge-driven killer and that Aya is a better character, which is crazy, but that's such a naive way to look at Bayek. He's so much more than that. He's a protector of his people, or as they call him, a Medjay. He's a father, and a heartbroken one. He's a proper spiritual leader. We get introduced to him at rock bottom. Remember that. Literally at the worst part of his life, already broken after the loss of his son Kemu, and we follow him as he tries to make sense of that pain while holding on to who he is. You know, if you think about it, it's actually that balance between his kindness and his brutality that makes him stand out. It's rare to see video game characters have that split personality. I mean, he'll gently talk to children and comfort villagers in one moment, then absolutely decimate somebody who's done real harm in the next. I do also think the performance by Abubakar Salim carried a lot of it. I've said it before, but I think Abubakar Salim is the best voice actor this franchise has ever seen. And hey, we've had Roger Craig Smith, we've had Nolan North, we've had Matt Ryan, we've had plenty of others. Still, the biggest letdown for me with Bayek is that we didn't get more. We had no follow-up game with him and Aya, or even just a glimpse of something special. I mean, if Ezio got a trilogy, then why not give Bayek that same treatment? I think he could have gone down as the best Assassin's Creed protagonist ever. Okay, let's be completely real. Yes, Ezio is talked about constantly, but that's not my problem. He's that good. If you're sick of hearing his name, maybe the real issue is that your favorite protagonist just doesn't hold up next to him. And instead of admitting that, you may attempt to drag Ezio down. I've seen it in recent years where it's become a trend to act like Ezio is overrated or only liked because of nostalgia. And while nostalgia does play a little role, pretending that that's the only reason he's remembered is just lazy analysis. Ezio has something that the rest of the characters are still chasing, and that is consistent development with actual growth, and a clear character evolution from literal birth, by the way, to his very death. We saw him at the age of 0, all the way up until he took his very last breath. We saw him go from a cocky teenager to a proper seasoned mentor who willingly walked away from the creed. That's rare in any type of game ever. The charm and confidence, I mean, he had it all. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood and Revelation showed us a man who started questioning things, somebody who matured and learned to read instead of just learning to kill. Now, not every assassin in the franchise got that depth, and the ones who did really nailed it the way Ezio did. I will say, yes, it's unfair that he's the only character that got a sequel or a trilogy, but that's because of how well received his character was in Assassin's Creed 2. People simply downplay him now because they want to lift up their own choices, and that's fine. If Eivor or Arno or Cassandra is your favorite, cool, but trying to rewrite history to pretend Ezio isn't in a league of his own is just dishonest. You don't have to like him, but denying why people do just makes your argument weaker. At the end of the day, Ezio Auditore is the benchmark, and if people keep bringing him up 15 years later, maybe there's a reason for that.